Hi there. Well, we are about to start Module 10, Part 2. We're continuing on the cybersecurity portion of it. We did a quiz before, just a fun thing, and now we move on to the other topics that we want to cover. I think we want to talk about external devices next. Talked about passwords and everything, and we talked about the bank example. But right now, we look at all the external devices, which we kind of refer to as endpoints. Endpoints are really important and scare the heck out of IT people because they're so easy to get lost or manipulate. So in the end, it's all about you. And the question has to do with policies and government. Much of this is beyond what you probably are responsible for, but it's good to know. But questions arise, are portable devices encrypted, and should they be? In many cases they are, or at least dependent upon the type of things and files that are being stored. Privacy. Do you have your personal device privacy settings placed in the right place, both at work and at home? I'm surprised in my classes how often I see people not really aware of the fact that you can change your privacy settings both on your tablets and your laptops, PCs, phones, and even at your place of work. It's interesting, in the state of California, they passed a law that says that anybody selling a router in the state of California cannot sell it with a default password. Many of the routers that are in government today and elsewhere, the older ones at least, basically came with the word admin as a unit and password as password, thinking that somebody would obviously change it. It's amazing how many people haven't, so that's a real risk. And then PC turned off, went away at night. There used to be a school of thought that said that you use more power when you do that, but it's been shown that in some cases computers actually can be turned on, if infected, at night, and the camera turned on, and look around you, what's perhaps behind you, which might be things that you have pasted on the wall, things of personal nature that can help somebody better understand you. Look at passwords, addresses, or things that you wouldn't want a stranger to know about. So we always say, when you leave, make sure that the camera is covered over or turned off or turned away, and turning off your equipment at night would help. And then this whole idea of passwords, are they complex enough and are they changed on a regular basis? So it really is all about you. And what I mean by that is it comes down to the individuals. We believe that the individual is the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity, and that's why we spend so much time in so many different venues talking about cybersecurity awareness. It cannot be left to just the CIO or the head of IT anymore. So you don't want to use your mobile device for your contacts as a database. I've seen people put in their children's social security numbers and whatnot, very personal information, their passport information, which is the first place that the bad guys look for, and not individually, but there are programs that are looking for those notes and things that you think might be hidden. And don't use your password for everything unless you have a password manager. I do. Having a piece of software is very, very helpful. That reminds me of all the different software passwords that I maintain. So I can maintain different ones for different things. So if something happened to one, it wouldn't happen to the other. That doesn't mean I should have Allen 1 and Allen 2 and Allen 3, but things that are different enough so that the cracked one, they're not going to necessarily use that as a means of cracking the other. This is where password managers come in because they will come up with all sorts of ramble stuff, and it'll make it very, very difficult. And the good thing is these password managers move across platforms, both at home, whether it be a mobile device, laptop, or whatever. Turn off location services when mobile devices are not needed for a whole bunch of reasons, one of which does save power, but it'll be more difficult to track you. Do not fall for phishing emails. Yes, they look remarkably real. And never click on a URL unless absolutely certain. And regarding password profiles, don't use questions where answers can be found through social media. There are some really hilarious clips by some late night comedians that are going around saying, what is your password? And someone says no, and then all of a sudden they said, what's the name of your dog? In the form of conversation, they would say it. And I said, I bet you that's in the password. Someone says yes. There are ways to fool people into giving that up. And of course, always update operating systems and apps and stay current. Again, I mentioned phishing. This is scary because you have phishing and you have spear phishing. two terms that are very much related. One is more general, the other is they're really out to get you. If you look carefully, you'll find ways to kind of distinguish one from the other. It's not always that obvious. Look for misspelled words. Look for the return URL without clicking on it. Often if you can just highlight it with your mouse, you'll see something, and here's something that looks like it's from iTunes, but look at that account. It has nothing to do with iTunes. Also, if they were real, they wouldn't be saying, "Dear iTunes customer," they would be using your name. So there's a whole bunch of giveaways in all of this. So what to look for? Look for personalization. If there is any, is your name spelled correctly? Look for misspellings, examine, don't click on a return URL unless you're absolutely certain. IT folks are more than happy to check it before you click on something. And if you have an opportunity, call or write to the company directly. Don't use any information contained in the email. So if it's from a bank, for someone where you do business, don't assume it's from that very group. What I will do is if I see something, rather than click on the URL, I will just go online separately and apart from any information given to me through an email and figure out if that is real or not. Again, contact tech support if any doubts linger at all. But it can happen to the best of us. White House officials tricked by email prankster. And it's amazing how many people have fallen for even a Supreme Court justice. Now, many government agencies and private businesses actually hire companies to send out very authentic looking phishing emails as a means to get people to be getting tripped up. They're not going to be punished, but they may have to take an online refresher course on what to look for. So sometimes it may actually be something that you've clicked. I knew somebody, and as soon as she clicked it, she realized she made a terrible mistake, called IT, and they said, "Oh, you're the 15th person, don't worry. We just want to make you more aware." The same thing is true of flash drives, those little endpoints. There are companies that actually do perimeter checks and walk by and drop or leave very good-looking USBs with alluring colors and whatnot as a means of tricking people to kind of put it in their computer, and as soon as they do, that contacts the IT people. If that happens to you, be grateful that it was that and not something of more serious consequence. The other thing I wanted to mention that's really hurting governments and may affect you more than most would be ransomware, because that can really screw up your website and the face in which people see things. Very often you sign on, you'll see something like this, ransomware and cyber extortion, computers under siege, or something more like this. Department of Justice, FBI, your computer has been locked. To unlock the computer, you're obliged to pay a fine of $200. Well, that's obviously part of the scam. What makes it very difficult is they are now requesting that payment be made in bitcoins so that it can't be traced. The FBI basically, of course, says you are not to give in, but sometimes it is cheaper to give in, so you've got to make the call. I prefer reconstructing the system and not having this happen in the first place. Having good backups, having good security can greatly add in preventing a lot of this. So there are some very tricky ransomware, and they're starting to ask more money. They're emboldened by their success rate. Yes, people are paying, and what that means is that they are asking more. When the city of Atlanta was hacked, and the ransomware fee was $56,000. Up to that point, most governments are being charged $500, maybe $1,000, a couple of thousand, far less than what it would cost to bring in outside expertise to help reconstruct things. And so, in this case, in the city of Atlanta, they spent over $6.5 million. But it also shows how poor this system was constructed. So, of course, always have a timely backup. But when it comes to backups, you have to make sure that you're not backing up things that are already infected. Someone said, well, I have a mirror drive. One mirrors the other. But that doesn't count because mirror drives only work in case of failure. They are mirror by the very definition. So you need to have applications separate from data and stored in different time increments so that you can go back to different time frames from which to reconstruct things, which is what has been done in most cases where people have not paid. The reason why the FBI says don't pay is, one, it encourages bad behavior, criminal behavior to occur more often and at a greater risk and more expense. The second reason is there's no assurance they won't do it again. And perhaps the third is they may not unlock your system at all. So then you're back to zero and you're out some money. So again, in general, there's a lot of things that you can do to be careful, not opening things that you shouldn't, instructing people what to do, teaching them what good cyber hygiene is all about. But you can, when we talk about passwords, use at least 8. It was too long ago, it was 6. Insist on no more than 3 to 5 tries. This is really important, or less, before the system does an automatic lockout and they have to go in and provide new credentials or call and talk to somebody. This is what the banks are doing. They're also using two-factor authentication, or a combination of many things. But you can't just allow people to continue to let them try different passwords, because today's supercomputers can do incredible damage. Then you have CAPTCHA, and there's different kinds, as a means to thwart high-speed automated systems, which says, to the simplest, you're not a computer, and by checking it, it can tell whether you are a computer or not. In some cases, there are pictures, click on all the things that show a street address, things like that, or click all the ones that are storefronts, or it could be words. I personally have trouble with words. Consider fingerprint readers in addition to or along with password protection systems, so that you have some form of biometric in addition to something else. I happen to have on one of my computers an iris scanner, and it actually looks and tells from my eyes. I have another computer where it does my fingerprint. Consider iris display, as I mentioned, require regular and mandatory periodic cyber awareness training. When it comes to passwords, it's amazing what people do and how it is abused. But when it comes to other threats, it may be people who are internal, not just external. Many of the things we always assume somebody's from outside the organization. But if you look at some of the problems that we deal with from an HR point of view, we have unhappy people, sometimes more unhappy than others. They didn't get a raise. They've gone through a string of bad luck. All sorts of things could contribute to that. We have unstable people. It doesn't mean they're always unstable, but have become unstable. We have mental illness. We have medical conditions. We have drug addiction, financial issues, family issues, depression, theft, even espionage. So there's a lot of things going on, and many government entities are very mindful of the fact that sometimes the greatest threat are actually things that are occurring internally. So one must be aware of that. The thing that I enjoy is the common myths. There are 9. First of all, I hear people say, I don't have anything anyone ever want on my system. And that's a myth, because you might have nothing more than the keys to getting into a bigger computer. You might have the addresses or passwords to get into a larger system that you don't even realize is important to somebody else. Number 2, I have the best antivirus software installed. That is meaningless unless you have it upgraded. People assume the central IT people are looking at it. It doesn't always happen that way. So you need to make it be sure that your stuff is being updated. I use Windows, so I'm saying today people are attacking Linux systems, let alone the Apple ecosystem. My network has a great firewall. Firewalls alone can't do it, especially if they're not upgraded and updated all the time. And sometimes if something gets in, they can get stuff out. And sometimes people forget that there needs to be two-sided firewalls, not just protecting what comes in, but to protect what goes out. My network administrator is the one in charge for my data. That's nice. In the old days, that probably was mostly true. Now it is everyone's responsibility. And I've had my password for years and nothing ever happened. Well, you've been lucky. Again, we say don't use one password for everything, and you should be changing it every so often. My device destroys harmful emails and attachments. That's not enough. We find there are still issues. And then the last one is interesting. In a city where we knew the CIO very well, the city council basically said we're going to put off moving from Windows 7 because we have breach insurance, even though it's not supported the way Windows XP. This was a year back. Windows XP, they were the last government agency to have it. Things worked, and they were really strapped for cash. And so they said we have breach insurance, so we're protected. That is the biggest myth, because today to get insurance, you have to certify all sorts of things that would surprise you if you haven't gone through that process. So what can be done? Better management of personnel, use of encryption on key documents and files. Not everything. A greater security or scrutiny for access to sensitive data, greater network and system monitoring, Required all-level training, cybersecurity awareness more than once a year. It should be ongoing. Consider two-factor authentication. Also improve checks and balances for movement of files and data. Greater scrutiny of classified employee background checks. Better management of mobile devices. Develop a breach response policy. And have adequate insurance. Review procurement policies. Conduct periodic audits. We'll come back to that breach policy in our Module 3. Another thing you can do, again, is patch, train, do backups, harden your systems, review and update policies, make sure you're in compliance. And you know, from compliance, there's an awful lot to comply with. Scan systems, encrypt mobile devices, and test, test, and test. If you haven't done so, we highly recommend you join the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. It's free, called MS-ISAC. PTI is members of it, and they will actually provide you with some free monitoring support. They have a lot of free services. They have some services for pay, but they do an amazing job. They are funded ultimately by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They are in all 56 states and territories, all 78 federally recognized fusion centers, more than 1,000 local governments, and that number grows all the time. So they are a great group. If you go to the Center for Internet Security, you'll see a little bit more. They're the parent. Again, it's a nonprofit, but they are funded by the Department of Homeland Security. They've got great stuff, both on cybersecurity for local government as well as for elections. So they have all sorts of tools. And so I would say, remember, and encourage an environment that encourages coming forward if and when a breach occurs. In the old days, one would punish somebody, said, how dare you not coming forward? We're going to punish you. Boy, you know, it's the opposite. You want to encourage people if something happens to come forward, because the sooner someone reports something weird or wrong, the sooner one can take remedial action. Do something to fix it. Start turning off systems. So people should be punished for not reporting it in a timely manner, not for reporting it. So you want to make sure that you have an environment that encourages openness and sharing of information. Because after all, information is so critical. It involves public trust, and there's nothing more critical than that. This ends part 2. We will now go, after a quick break, to part 3.